You can see just a few of the organizations that are involved. The folks that helped organize this tonight are Irene Chekovich from Mashpee Environmental Coalition, Sue Dangle, and Jonathan Small, who's not here, but was a great help from Save Mashpee-Wakeby Pond. Well, all of them are also involved in the Mashpee Ponds Coalition. And I'm one of the members of the Mashpee Clean Waters, which is just a grassroots group that it focuses on how we can help clean Mashpee's waters. As I was saying, this is a great website that the town has created. It explains the buffer and floodplain regulations that are being proposed for town meeting. And we're not going to go into the depth of information that's here, but for those of you who are interested in digging deeper, we've got the detailed language of the warrant articles, related documents, and then scientific literature that's relevant to the challenge here. So with that, I refer you to this, but what we're here to do tonight is to talk and hear from each other and hear from some of the folks in the town who have developed this proposal, and then open it to questions from the audience. So Sue, if you want to introduce the guests and kind of give some background, and then we can get started. You're muted.
Mute. There I am. Okay, thanks everybody. And thank you, Mary, for opening and showing everybody the website. I'm Sue Dangle from Save Mashpee-Wakeby Pond Alliance, and also the newly formed Mashpee Ponds Coalition. And, you know, we're all very passionate about finding ways to open the toolbox or take a piece of the puzzle and continue to chip away at the enormous water quality problem we have in Mashpee. So we're very supportive of these articles, and we're thrilled that Paul Colombo, the chair of the Conservation Commission, and Dan Kent, our assistant conservation agent, are here tonight. There may be some more members of the Conservation Commission able to come in a little while. And if they do, I'll be sure to
read that while I try to hear this.
There's definitely some feedback, Mary. I thought what I would do is just turn it over to Paul and Dan, let them tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll start right in with the question and answer.
Okay, I'll default to Dan first. Dan, if you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about the Conservation Department, and then I'll come in and talk about the commission in general.
Yeah, sure. How's it going? My name's Dan Kent. I'm the assistant conservation agent for town. I started last November, and I've got right into the kick of things pretty much right away. So I live in Mashpee with my family, and so when it comes to water quality, conservation, all that stuff, it's top of the line for me. So it's great being involved in all of this, and I think these are fantastic things that the town's going to definitely need, especially when it comes to the vegetated buffer strips and all that. So.
Perfect. I'm Paul Colombo. I'm the chairman of the Conservation Commission. For those of you that aren't familiar with the structure of the commission and what we do, the commission is typically a 7-member, full-member voting board with 4 associate memberships to round out the commission. An associate member has all of the duties and obligations of a full member. They just do not vote unless they are needed to round out and to give us a quorum, a voting quorum. Our primary obligation is to protect the environmental quality of the town of Mashpee, primarily in what we call the resource area. Many of you call it the wetlands area, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later tonight, the differences of that terminology. I've been on the commission now for 3 years. I came in right with COVID. Sorry about that. And the first year was tough. It was all like this. We're on Zoom, and it was a very difficult thing to keep going. But now we're beyond that stage, and we're back out. We're doing site visits. We're looking at rules, regulations, trying to do some edits and to bring the regulations up to today's standards. A lot of the rules that we're using, quite honestly, they're upwards to 20 years old. And when you have rules and regulations that are 20 years old to help you with today's problems, you have a problem. So we are actively looking at all of our regulations to bring them into a better working sense for all of the people in Mashpee. Thank you.
Great. Paul, I guess I'll toss the first question to you. Mary, are they going to put questions in the chat, or how are you going to run this?
Yeah, if folks want to put questions in the chat, I think we'll kick off with a few just open questions from the organizers, and then if folks want to raise their hand or unmute, I'll keep an eye on that and bring others in.
Paul, can you give us just a little background on the genesis of these proposals to change the wetlands bylaws? And I believe that these came from some recommendations from Fuss and O'Neill, who did the project with Ashley Fisher to some degree.
Yeah. Yes, the town contracted Fuss and O'Neill a few years ago to take a look at all of the bylaws that the town of Mashpee has, not just the conservation bylaws, but all of them in general, to look to see where we may be able to improve our services to the community. One of the things that, given the state of the water quality that we have, one of their recommendations was to look at the buffer zones that we traditionally use when we take jurisdiction of a project and we condition a project to protect the wetlands interest. And their recommendation was to increase that buffer zone. I don't believe they actually came up with a number. I mean, it's the buffer zones right now are 100 feet for the jurisdictional buffer and 50 feet for a naturally vegetated wetlands buffer. And we felt as though if we were going to increase those, and it certainly is the best thing to do, to just do a minimal increase, to push the 100 jurisdictional buffer to 150, and to push the naturally vegetated wetlands buffer from 50 to 75. And that's based on very sound science. Soil hydrology is not an easy subject for the average person to understand. But here on the Cape, I think the average person does understand that our soils are really not soils, they're sand. And when you have sand as your filtering subsurface, the porosity of that sand it's wide open and things travel extremely fast. So when you look at buffer zones off the Cape into typical upland soils, we're using the same standards that they are, but our soils are so much different. And so it makes a world of sense when you even for simplicity's sake, look at soil structure. When you're all sand at a perk rate of less than 2 minutes per inch, you really need a little bit more space to ensure the integrity of the wetlands environment. So that's pretty much where we are. And we thought that the proposal for the articles was minimal at best. I mean, I would like to see it larger, but we understand that the constraints of small lot sizes and zoning setbacks and everything else. And even with what we're proposing, some people may get squeezed a little bit, but we're willing to work with anybody that comes before us, in terms of waivers or variances that we could grant in order to protect the wetland and at the same time work with the applicant, the homeowner, to meet their needs.
Great. And when we're talking about wetlands, can you just describe what is a wetland? I mean, what are we talking about?
It's a term that gets thrown around a lot. It's actually a term that came in back in 1978 when we had the so-called Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act. I'm sure Dan will speak a lot more in regards to this, but In the office and in the field, we don't really call them wetlands. We call them resource areas because there's a whole variety of resource areas. Sue, I know you live right on the shores of Wakeby Pond, and that's a freshwater resource area. I live very close to Hamlin Pond, and that's a saltwater environment. They're two completely different types of wetlands. So rather than use the word wetlands, we call them resource areas because it runs the whole gamut. You've got vernal pools that you'll find in wooded areas. You have salt marshes, you have land under the ocean, you have coastal banks, you have inland banks. It's a long, long list, and they're all outlined in the State Wetlands Protection Act as areas that need to have protective rights. So I tend to push the wetland thing out of the way because people, they hear that word and they're looking for water. And many times there's no water involved, like land subject to coastal flow. If you're in the middle of a floodplain, you are in a resource area and you're so far from the ocean, you might not even realize. You'll say, well, you're calling my property wetlands? I don't see any water. So there is that problem with the term wetlands.
Great. Irene, do you have any questions?
Absolutely. Irene Shekovich, I am a board member of the Mashpee Environmental Coalition, and I'm also a member of the Mashpee Ponds Coalition, and I'm glad to be here tonight. Paul or Dan, because both the buffer strip and the buffer zones are mentioned, can you just go into a little bit more detail about what the difference is between the strip and the zone itself?
Yeah, I can take over that one from there. So the buffer zone itself goes horizontally from the wetland resource area. Currently it goes 100 feet. So anywhere within that 100 feet horizontally from the resource area is our buffer zone. Within that buffer zone, you can have a multitude of things. You can have naturally vegetated buffer strips. You could have multiple resource areas on top of themselves for that buffer zone. And when it comes to naturally vegetated buffer strips, that's the strip of natural vegetation that abuts any resource area. So if you have an inland bank resource area, you'll have vegetation right on the bottom, going down the bank perhaps, or even at the bottom of the bank, but most likely you'll have it at the top of the bank. And stuff like that we want to make sure is maintained. But the vegetated buffer strip, they are, hopefully you'd want them connected. In Mashpee, that's one of the things that these bylaw changes will address, is connecting more buffer strips, because the naturally vegetated buffer strip is a key for pretty much everything from water quality to pollution, degradation, to all that. So it's very essential to have.
Right, and can either one of you maybe explain a little bit more what you're hoping this increase from 100 feet to 150 feet will do in terms of improving the water quality? Will it make a difference?
Yeah, it absolutely will make a difference. It'll give more of an opportunity for naturally vegetated buffer strips to be more connected between individual properties. Right now in Mashpee, you can look at aerials and the vegetated buffer strips are not connected at all. They're not contiguous. And that's one of the goals that we would love to see. Also help with pollution runoff, any sedimentation that's going into these areas, such as, salt marshes. I've seen a lot of sedimentation so far in my time here, just taking over salt marshes, just sand covering them up and killing all the vegetation and the resource area itself. So that's definitely something we're aiming at. So I think these will cover it quite well. Wildlife habitat's very important too. Improving and increasing all these naturally vegetated buffer strips will increase wildlife habitat, as well as wildlife corridors, which are essential for all resource areas, no matter how different they are.
I'd like to touch on that a little bit too. Given we are sitting in a completely different world and there was no problem with declining water quality, the Conservation Commission would be on just as much of a campaign to increase the naturally vegetated buffer strip. We have a whole host of wildlife species here on the Cape that are literally being threatened by the amount of development that's taking place on the Cape. And it's not a Cape Cod problem. It's a Massachusetts problem. It's a US problem. And as we continue to develop the face of the earth, we're sharing that with our wildlife counterparts. Many of us that live in areas where we abut conservation lands, we see it all the time. We don't have buffer strips. We have a vast amount of conservation land in our backyards. And we can only imagine the pressure that a species like the eastern box turtle, which is very common in Mashpee. I see them going through my yard all the time. And I see them struggling sometimes going through grassy areas, trying to get into a vegetated strip where there's some shade and perhaps where they can dig into the sand and deposit their eggs. So again, there's a lot of different reasons why a vegetated buffer strip should be increased. You know, if we had wide open spaces, if we were up in Vermont or New Hampshire and there's a lot of elbow room, I'd be pushing for a couple hundred feet of a vegetated buffer strip. That's not realistic where we are, but it is realistic to look towards that 25-foot increase, because that 25 feet really does make a world of difference for some of the species of animals that we have.
And if I remember correctly, rivers themselves even have a 200-foot buffer zone. Isn't that correct? Along the river?
Yeah, that is correct. And that's part of the Wetlands Protection Act. That's not a Mashpee bylaw. And the reason the Wetlands Protection Act instituted a 200-foot buffer for rivers is strictly because of the reasons of wildlife increase, sedimentation decreasing, pollution control, stormwater recharge. So they know that's all factors within these buffer strips. So they just mandated for the whole state that the riverfronts be 200 foot. So when it comes to that, having a 50-foot increase overall is actually pretty good, considering that it's already acknowledged that they do what the work that they're supposed to do. So,
Right.
And I would add on a little bit, if I could add on just a tiny bit to what Dan mentioned. That buffer zone in relation to rivers, it's really referred to as the riparian zone, and it is 200 feet, Irene, as you mentioned. But we break that down into two very distinct categories. We talk about the inner riparian zone of 100 feet and the outer riparian zone, which is that second 100 feet. And when you're inside that 100 feet, it's kind of like a buffer zone for other wetland resources. We're very fussy about what goes in there. We try to work with people, try to get the development down to the minimal amount as possible. And when you get into the outer 200 feet, well, that's not as critical. But altogether, the state allows up to 5,000 square feet of disturbance in a riparian zone. That's a lot of disturbance. You know, your average home that's built out, it's certainly not going to have a 5,000 square foot footprint. So I don't see it as being any more or less restrictive than what we're looking at.
I'll ask a question that's in the chat, and I think it's related to a lot of questions that folks have. It says, can you talk about grandfathering and where it applies to the changes? I think for existing homeowners with their existing yards, you know, how will they be affected by this? And then, you know, at what point does it become an issue for a homeowner?
Sure. Dina, do you want to start that one? Or?
Yeah, sure, I can start that. So for a homeowner themselves, it's when it comes to the grandfathering in, we're not going to be going out and just enforcing all of this on the spot. That's just not practical, and it just wouldn't be fair. So when it comes to the grandfathering in, things that are already in place are already in place. You know, going forward, the permit, if you had something in place before and you apply for that same thing, you might be pushed with, you know, you need more mitigation or things like that. But we're not going to look at it until we have a permit come before us, or there's some kind of violation or an egregious violation on that property where we can go on and then work with it from there, you know? So an example of that is we have houses that have green grass up to the water line, both ponds and coastal in some spots of town. And we don't just pursue them and say, you know, you have to get rid of your green grass. They come to the commission for a permit, and then the commission will work with them from there. We'll say, hey, I see that you have green grass up to there. Can you increase your naturally vegetated buffer strip? Or can you add mitigation here instead of add mitigation there? Or they work with the applicant on it. So it's one of those things that once it comes to the commission for a permit, it will be brought up and we'll try to work with them from there to make it a better situation for the environment and the homeowner.
One thing I would add to that, when we talk in terms of grandfathering, Dan mentioned the house is there, it's legally permitted. If we look at a situation like raise and replace, a lot of these houses are coming out, and we understand that they come out, but those are legally permitted houses. And that house would go right back in where it was. I had a person say to me one day, well, what if my house burned down? If you increase this buffer zone and naturally vegetated buffer strip, am I going to be able to put my house back? Absolutely. The house was there. It's legally permitted. So the fear or the idea that we're trying to increase these buffer zones and take away the rights of people's property, it's just unfounded completely. People that, if this were to pass, people are going to come in, we're going to sit down, we're going to work with them. We're going to do the best we can to help them do what they need to do with their property. However, at the same time, it has to meet the regulations. And there are always different methodologies to use to provide what Dan mentioned as mitigation. And some people might say, what is mitigation? What does this word mean? The average person might not get what that is. And that's just taking areas that you're going to now take occupancy of with the structure, and that square footage, you would have to somewhere on your lot, hopefully near the resource area, plant some native vegetation to increase that buffer. Those new plants that go in are the mitigation. So I know some of this terminology might not be well known to the average person.
Could I ask a follow-up question, Paul? You know,
Sure.
People talk a lot about native vegetation, and you know, why is that important, and what do you mean by that? And you know, how does that become part of the solution?
You know, whether you're sitting here on Cape Cod or you're somewhere in Arizona, native vegetation is just that. It's what typically grows in that zone without a lot of care and watering. The key here is watering. Native vegetation here on the Cape, and there's a whole variety of different types of flowers and trees and bush species. They require very little care in terms of the amount of water that needs to be given, and most importantly, the amount of fertilizer that needs to be used. So we always encourage native species for this region because it is very easy to take care of. It flourishes. It's very beneficial to the wildlife that's found in this area. And some people sometimes do provide to the commission what we call ornamental types of vegetation. And sometimes those are permitted, but our preference obviously is native species.
I'll just invite folks, anybody on the call, if you want to unmute yourself. If you don't want us to be on camera, you can also put something in the chat, but we welcome questions.
I want to mention, it looks like a few people have just joined in the last minute or so. So maybe we can mention that this is being recorded. So if you'd like to go back at some point and hear the beginning of it, that recording will be available. I'm not sure where, but you would be able to get filled in on what you missed.
Yeah, and that'll be on, we have Mashpee Clean Waters has a YouTube channel. We also post it on our Facebook page. But the YouTube channel anybody can get to, and it just as soon as we get, as I edit it, hopefully by the weekend, then we'll have it out there.
Mary, am I able to share my screen?
Yes.
Last week I spoke to the finance committee about the petition articles that we put in place, which are mirrors of these, just to make sure that they remain on the warrant and there's a vote this year. I showed the finance committee, need to get back to Zoom. I showed the finance committee a couple of pictures that are helpful. Let me just see if I can pull it up. All right, this is what I wanted to share. Where is it? I'm not quite as savvy on these things. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is a picture of the average lawn in the United States. And as you can see, the roots are pretty shallow, almost maybe about 6 inches if you get a really good solid lawn going. And we all know about the Cape Cod lawn, but that's a picture of the standard lawn. And here's a picture. These aren't necessarily from Mashpee, but this is what a typical native plant root system would look like. So I think it's a pretty, are you seeing it?
Oh, yeah.
It's a pretty good visual to show how deep the root systems of the native plants that we have go and how far down into our soils they go and our sand. So they're able to pick up the nitrogen and phosphorus that are coming through before they get to the water, whereas the grass just simply can't get that deep. And furthermore, like what Paul was saying, these particular roots are so low, they don't need the irrigation because they're getting to the groundwater. So that's what I showed last week. And let me just see if I stopped. Have I stopped sharing?
Yeah, you're all set.
Okay. But I just thought that was a pretty good picture of why we're talking about all this.
You know, and so I'm looking at that root structure and I'm thinking back to what I had said about the porosity of sand. I mean, everybody's gone to the beach and they've taken a bucket of water and they've dumped it into the sand, and you know how quick that goes. It's gone. And if you can just picture the effluent coming out of a septic tank, it travels just as fast to the groundwater. If you can get that depth of root structure that you just showed from native vegetation in as a buffer zone, you are really looking at a world of difference in terms of filtration to deal with nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from anybody's lot. And we all have it. Every person in this town is contributing to the problem. This is not a problem that's coming from somewhere in the outside world.
Great.
Anyone else have a question? Looks like Nicholas, or did you unmute?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So like with this, I understand the rooting system with vegetation that is there, but I think this might need to be taken by a case-by-case basis on the lot, because in building, I mean, we have obviously a lot of lots that are in the area. So from a builder standpoint, not as a greedy standpoint, but you look at what vegetation is on the lot at that point, maybe does not have that same sort of rooting system. We're looking at a lot of scrub oak, scrub pines, kind of in that area, and basically everything is just fallen, rotting vegetation, which is on the ground, which is not grasses like you are talking about. I completely understand that everything that is rooted in that area, that, you know, obviously that should stay. Are you going to take that into consideration? I mean, with what we have as any kind of lots in that area, but even somebody that maybe is holding on to a lot as is going to do their, forever home, will that get taken into account in those areas? Because I know the buffer zone can change from that.
Dan, you might, because I know you go out a lot to represent us in the field, so I'm going to let you start that one. I have a few thoughts later, but go ahead.
Yeah, when it comes to applicants, any applicant's going to be able to bring any project before the commission, and they'll be worked with it. There won't be any restrictions when it comes to what they can bring before the commission. It'll just have to be, it'll be worked out. There might be things that have to be changed. But there will be, there are waivers in place. There will be exceptions taken as long as the case and the supporting data, the facts can be provided. Yeah, you can definitely get stuff done on a property that you might think not be able to with the 150-foot increase. You might have to offset here and there, but it's not going to restrict any homeowner or someone who wants to make their forever home from fully accomplishing that goal. It's not going to stop them or anything like that. It just might restrict their overall scope or ideas. That's all.
Yeah, I think what happens, I think, is people get nervous in that kind of circumstance with what they can actually, like, you know, what you would charge for a lot or what they can actually build on that lot in that area with that, if you do increase to that 150-foot restriction, because almost the lot becomes unusable at that point because of, you know, maybe the other side is a drop off or abuts another wetland that comes in, but you're basically just pushing the build area down to a very small sliver.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I don't feel that a lot would be fully undevelopable. And you might just have to be scaled back the construction of the dwelling or whatever the project may be. It might just be scaled back. I would hope not that, I would hope that a lot be developable at all, but I don't feel that would happen.
Okay.
One thing I would add to that, I've been on a lot of site visits over the last several years, and almost all lots that I go on to are, first of all, non-conforming because they don't meet that 1 acre criteria that Mashpee now has for building. But a lot of the lots, if not most of them, are pre-disturbed. There are areas that at one time were naturally vegetated and now they're not. And so as you go from lot to lot, whether it's never been developed at all, or if it's an applicant that is in the process of wanting to develop that lot, it's not a one size fits all. I know both Dan and our other agent, Drew McManus, are more than willing to go out and talk with the homeowners, look at the lot, get a sense of what is there, what isn't there, what are the possibilities for increasing a buffer strip if one needs to be, what kind of, and here comes that word again, mitigation would be needed for what you might be thinking about building. But I agree with Dan. I think no matter what kind of a lot you have, to say that, well, this lot just will have no value, it's not developable. I don't know if that argument really holds any credence. And even if on the local level, we looked at it and there's just no way we could come up with anything to fit into that lot, an applicant could go right on to the state and they can look for a variance from the state commissioner to the DEP. That's always a possibility. If the local conservation commission says, no, this just isn't going to work, that's not the end of the story. An applicant is more than capable of moving on to the state level and asking for what is referred to as a superseding order of conditions. So, you know, as Dan mentioned, and I know Drew said this many, many, many times, and I feel the same way as chairman of the commission, we're willing to work with anybody. You might not end up with everything you want, and certainly we're not going to get all the mitigation we want, but I think in the end, everybody's going to come away with what they need, and primarily the town in terms of the water quality for the adjacent resource area.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know me and Dan have gone out and looked at, you know, lots in particular that we were talking about building houses on, but it does squish that down. But I appreciate the, you know, you being able to work with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Heather, did you have a question? Okay, I'll go ahead and mute you just so we keep the sound quality good. But anyone that has a question, please do feel free, unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Anyone else? Paul, do you know how to unmute? Yeah. If you, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, just a question. What triggers enforcement of either the old bylaw or the new bylaw? And what I'm looking at is, are there existing violations that are just going untreated because while we're not enforcing anything on something that already exists. My question again is that we're talking about new bylaws to increase the buffer zone. That's wonderful. I don't have a problem with that. But what triggers enforcement of either the old or the new? Is it only when someone is trying to change their property? Or are we looking for violating septic systems or cesspools or whatever may be putting too much of the bad stuff into the water systems?
So there's a couple ways to that. When it comes to catching a violation and actually being able to enforce it, the first step we have to do is actually be able to see it. So sometimes we might go on neighbor's property if we have permission from them, or I might go out on a site visit and we have permission to go on properties and I see a neighbor's property and I can clearly see there's a violation in place. I can take a photo of it and then process the violation from there. So there's that way for enforcement. But when it comes to septics and things like that, the commission is going to have more of a say when it comes to innovative alternative systems, the IA systems. And in one of the new bylaws, it actually says the commission will be able to enforce them to actually have a IA septic system if it's a new house build, if the system fails, or if they're going to do something like increase flow of their house. If the house is in the jurisdiction, then the commission is going to be able to have a say in an IA system going in. So that'll be one big thing, especially for the septic systems, is the commission will have a say within one of the bylaws to say you need an IA system because you're in this jurisdiction, or because you're going to do this, or because your septic system failed and your house is in jurisdiction. So when it comes to enforcement for that, it will be a little easier. But again, it's going to be just basically making eyes on the violations going on at the time, which is not always the easiest thing in the world. So
I guess my question is, do we know if there are a lot or only a few of under the ground? I'm not talking about the vegetation. I'm talking about
okay.
underground. Do we know if there are a lot of violations that are just going unattended, or do we have any idea?
That I'm not too sure. I know they're keeping track of the cesspools in general. But when it comes to underground violations, with the new bylaws, there will also be a nitrate calculation that'll have to be done by new developments, by new houses, by new lots and stuff like that, where they'll have to actually fill in numbers on one side for their nitrate, what they're going to be putting nitrogen into the ground, and then get a calculation. The commission will be able to use that as evidence and as facts to say, you're going to be putting too much nitrate into the ground for this project. Is there a way you can reduce that? So there will be a way to track it under the ground for the commission, as long as all these bylaws pass. Yeah.
Paul, can I just ask you to clarify, are you talking about specifically about septic systems or some other kind of source?
Septic, mostly septic or cesspool. And I'm just
Yeah.
wondering how many, there are many people that are near water. Fortunately, I'm not near water, so I don't think I have a problem, but there are many people that are near water. They may be violating the existing bylaws and don't know it because the septic system is too close to the wetlands or the resource area, or their septic systems is just hasn't been pumped in years and it's just spewing into it. Is the town doing anything about that? I know we're talking primarily of new development or changes to development, but there may be many violations that people just don't know about or the town doesn't know about. And I'm wondering, that may be a bigger problem than planting vegetation.
So I'm going to jump in a little bit and then let Paul and Dan comment. But the septic system, basically, everybody with the Title V system in Mashpee is part of the problem because Title V systems do not remove nitrogen.
Agreed.
So that's it's a very big problem. We've only taken the first step with phase 1, and there's a lot more that we need to do related to that. So we'll continue to we did a lot of information sessions when we were getting ready for phase 1, and hopefully there will be more of those kinds of things coming. But a number of us have been using the analogy of a puzzle, that there are many pieces to this puzzle, and the septics are going to be addressed, and I think the Conservation Commission's already taken some steps there. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing the buffers as well.
Oh, I understand. I understand.
I can add maybe a little bit more information. If you go back a ways, I know the select board had asked the Board of Health to identify all cesspools in the town of Mashpee. You know, where are these cesspools? Are they within 100 feet of water bodies, 300 feet of water? Where are they? Let's get some type of a matrix together so we know what we're dealing with, and then let's start dealing with it on a case-by-case basis. That study has been done. Those figures have been released. I actually have all of the cesspools that are in relationship to 100 feet from water bodies and 300 feet from water bodies. But Dan touched on it a little bit, and I'm going to expand a little bit more. We were talking earlier about a house that's grandfathered, correct? The house is in there. Well, cesspools went in, not that they're grandfathered, but they went in according to the law. And until such time as that cesspool can be proclaimed a failure, and that would be if the cesspool is actually breaking out and you can see a point source discharge coming from that cesspool over the face of the earth and into the resource area, that cesspool, in terms of anyone's knowledge, because it's subterranean, is functioning. Is it functioning according to today's standards? No. Are our regulations functioning towards today's standards? And I mentioned this at the beginning of the session. No, we have to update regulations. We have to update cesspools. I'd like to take everyone out of the ground tonight before this clock strikes midnight, if I could. But until such time as it fails, or if the property is being transferred, I believe, and I'm speaking for the Board of Health, it's an automatic failure. It's got to come out. And we now have what's called Regulation 30, and it addresses cesspools, that they're automatic failures. They're out because they're never going to meet the nitrogen loading standards that we've promulgated for law here in Mashpee. So yeah, they're out there, and we know everyone that's out there, and we're looking at them on a case-by-case basis. At our last hearing, I believe we took 6 of them out of the ground with that large IA system proposal that was over, I believe it was off the shore of Hamlin Pond. So they're coming by, you know, one at a time. We're going to pluck them out and they're going to be gone. If the DEP comes in and, you know, says, okay, your watershed permit is this and you need IAs over here, that process will accelerate. But under the guidelines and the laws that we have right now, we're doing the best we can. And again, if they break out, game over. It comes out. There's no question about that. But as Dan mentioned before, if we see a wetlands violation, he's got to observe that from the street. We're not about to, nor do we have the permission to go and start digging people's yards up to see if their cesspool is actually functioning. So we get it. And there's no one more frustrated than Dan is sitting on that side of the screen and I'm over here on this side, and everybody else that works in the commission office, if not in the Board of Health. We just look at these things and we just wish they weren't there, but they are. And sooner or later they won't be. And again, they are a bigger piece of the puzzle. They're certainly more important than an increased buffer zone. And in time, we will get every single one of them.
Thank you.
And I just want to correct myself real quick. The nitrate calculator is on Regulation 30. That's coming. That just got made, not the bylaws being voted on. That's all.
Thank you, Paul.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Mary, I think one question that didn't get asked was if this does get voted in at town meeting, and I know most of us here hope it does, when would that then take effect?
Sure. I can speak a little bit to that, and I'm sure Dan will add on a little more. As we change regulations, those take effect immediately. In fact, at our last conservation meeting, we did change 2 regulations under our wetlands bylaw, the regulation that determines fees, filing fees and such, and this nitrogen loading regulation. That takes effect immediately. A bylaw, so we have these 2 articles, and they are definitely articles to amend the wetland bylaw. That goes before the town meeting. The voters vote yes or no, majority rules. Then if it were to pass, that would have to be forwarded to the Attorney General's office for a complete review. And then it would come back either favorable or unfavorable. And hopefully if it's something they want, it would come back favorable. That process usually takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months. Could be a little quicker. Unfortunately, it might be a little longer, but that's the window of time that I've been told, 4 to 6 months. And Dan, I don't know, you might have a little more information on that.
No, that's what I was going to say. From the vote here, it then goes to the state, the Attorney General's office in the state. So I'm not too sure at this point on how long that could take. As you said, 4 to 6 months. I have heard stories where it took a little longer. So yeah, we'll see. But I feel very confident in this for the town voting. I think it's very well needed, and fingers crossed from my end. I really think it is good.
Great. Does
Thanks,
that
any
answer
other-
the, Irene? I don't know if that's what she was really looking for.
Yes, I think so. Irene, did he answer your question?
Yes.
I just put into the chat, folks, the link to the town's information page that I showed at the beginning. That's a wonderful effort, and we really welcome the great information that you're putting out there. I think it helps everybody. So if you want more details, there's that. Also, I'll go ahead and share it real fast. On that page, you see it's highlighting the April 4th workshop, and it'll be at the library, and they'll have slides and a lot of information to continue to educate all of us. And you know, there's so many big challenges facing us with our waters, but the good news is that we have both volunteer and staff resources that are really spending a lot of time with all these puzzle pieces to begin to resolve our problems. So thank you very much. I don't know, does anybody else have any other questions, closing comments? Paul and Dan?
Yeah, Mary, I was going to ask you, you pulled it down rather quick. Could you put that screen share back up for the
Sure.
planning? It was the planning board's website. Okay. And would you go up to where it says boards and committees
Yeah.
and just click on that and come down to Conservation Commission? That'll take you over to our website. Now, all these blue menus that are on the various town web pages, we've been talking a lot tonight about, you know, Regulation 30 and Regulation whatever and the bylaw. And people are probably thinking, where are all of these things? They're all very easily accessible on our webpage. If you come down this blue menu that's on the left-hand side, right there where it says Regulations, Bylaws, and Policies. Keep coming on
Oh,
down,
got it.
right there. Yeah,
Yeah.
click on that.
I'm going to open that in a new tab.
Okay, here's all of the regulations and bylaws that we as a commission and the agents are following. Chapter 172, the bylaws there. Chapter 172, all of the various regulations, whether it's for mitigation or buffer zones or naturally vegetated buffers or land subject to coastal flow, it's all right there. And of course, all the conservation land bylaws and regulations are there, as well as the State Wetlands Protection Act. So people sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed by all these regulatory numbers and letters and laws and rules. And they say, where does all this come from? It's all right there. It's very easy to access. This is a wealth of information for any potential applicant, landowner, developer, whoever it might be. Everything that we use as a regulatory tool is listed right there. And it's very easy to click on. You can download the entire set of rules and regulations as a PDF form, put it right on your computer, you're good to go. So it's very easy sometimes to navigate around when you know where things are. If you know where they are, you're there forever. But I just wanted to point that out while you had the screen. And there's the amendments, of course, to the articles that are under consideration for the May town meeting. And that's a wonderful resource there. Irene was talking about that before we went live, the osprey nest that's over at the Wacoit Reserve Center. That's the ospreys are back and the camera's recording everything that they do live, which is a wonderful thing to watch. Thank you,
And
Mary. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was just looking, I was thinking that there were something, is that under resources that there's a page somewhere that has some links to, yeah, so here,
Yep.
native plant
Buffer
list,
zone resource values. Yeah, there's a
Right.
lot of stuff here.
right? Lawn standards, that's a whole
Yeah.
topic. So yeah, it's a very rich resource, and thank
Yeah,
you.
9 times out of 10, whatever
Yeah.
question we get, it's already on the website, but people just aren't aware of, where to find it. So I thought while you're screen sharing, that might not be a bad idea to show.
Great.
Thanks.
Mary, can you just remind folks again where you're going to post the link to this video in case they want to view it or even share it with other people?
Yeah, I'll bring up, I'll stop sharing and I'll pull up our YouTube. If you search on YouTube for Mashpee Clean Waters, you'll find it there, but I'll also pull that up. If you just give me a second. And then if you're on Facebook, Mashpee Clean Waters has a Facebook group. I can share that real fast. Well, I can't do that. Yeah. But if you'll, Irene and Sue, if you'll just tell about your groups and where people can find it, and then I'll find the YouTube link.
Stu, you're muted.
Thanks. Sorry about that. We have a Facebook group where we will post it as well. Save Mashpee-Wakeby. I think that's all it is. Or is it Save Mashpee-Wakeby Pond Alliance? That's what I think it is. It's a group. You'd want to look for the group and we will have it there.
And same with us. Once we get that link, we'll post it on both the Mashpee Environmental Coalition website, and we also have a Facebook page where it will be posted as well.
Great.
All right, folks, I got it now. I'll share my screen just so you see it, and then I can put it in the chat, the link.
Oh, great.
Oh, saw a question here from Nicole asking, I guess somebody answered it, but Rosa rugosa is that a recommended buffer plant?
A lot of people think that Rosa rugosa is a native plant, and it actually is not. It's an invasive, but I mean, it's so prolific here that for all practical purposes, it's here. It's not going to go away. We just recently had a job, and the address escapes me, but it was a coastal bank that was totally vegetated with Rosa rugosa, and it made sense to leave that plant species there because of the root structure and its capability of stabilizing that bank. I think, Dan, you were out on that job, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so that was an armored bank. The bank was armored since the 60s. And sometime in the 70s, they planted Rosa rugosa on the whole thing. And they've maintained it perfectly. So that was the main reason that they were allowed to, because they maintained it so perfectly through the years. The roots have gotten so big, it stabilized the bank. And in doing so, they also hand removed all the invasives that ever grew in. So the bank was stabilized, it was good. But Rosa rugosa is not native in one of our natives lists. But when it comes to things like that, if you're able to prove that the bank's being stabilized, in this case by the rugosa, then the commission was very much happy about that and willing to approve it. So no, it's not a native, but it's not unheard of to pass for the commission because of the significance of the individual case.
Really a tough species to work with. I mean, if you want to keep the invasives out, you better have some thick gloves on because they bite.
Yeah, that's
but they're a pretty plant. The pink and the white flowers they're gorgeous, and the rose hips that come after them. I mean, it does have a lot of value.
Thank you. Sorry, I just unmuted. Yeah, I actually think there was a project over in Papaneset on G Place, and they stabilized the bank with Rosa rugosa. And I think ComCom was out 2 years ago on that, so that might have been the one that was referred to. So yeah, no, I was just curious because most of Papanesset's Rosa rugosa, but it seems to hold up pretty well in holding at least
Yeah.
the sand before the spit in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very wind hardy too, so that's good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Actually, when they reconstructed the boat ramp on Great Oak Road, just before you come to South Cape Beach, that entire garden area in the parking lot was all planted with Rosa rugosa. And it's prolific everywhere on South Cape Beach. So, I mean, it is, but it's an Asian invasive that came in, I believe, in the 1800s, and it's here to stay.
It is. Fortunately, just like multiflora rose.
Yep.
Well, not seeing any more questions. Any last chance, anybody? Definitely want to thank Sue and Irene for helping set this up. And of course, Paul and Dan for taking the time. I know you're already doing lots of public sessions, and we just appreciate all the time that you're giving to Mashpee and to the, our environment and our water. So thank you very much for being here, and thanks to everybody for your interest. And please encourage folks to get to town meeting. Town meeting is such an important venue where we really talk a lot about and make decisions that affect the future of the town. So thanks to everybody.
Well, thank you, Mary. It's
Thanks,
been a pleasure
Mary.
to be here and share our thoughts and ideas with you. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
You as well.
Thank you.